Hello guys, I am Talisa with Talisa Aquarist, and today I wanted to jump on here and talk to you guys about why I prefer keeping pest snails in my fish tanks. When I say pest snails, I'm referring to ram's horn snails, Malaysian trumpet snails, and bladder snails. So the little tiny snails that reproduce at a massive rate. Now there's a lot of videos out there talking about the pros and the cons of keeping these types of snails in your tanks. I'm not going into great detail on that in this video, but what I am going to do that most of them do not do in these videos, I'm going to show you the effects it has on a tank to not have pest snails. I don't think they're pests. I'm just referring to them as pest snails because that's what most people refer to them as. But I want to show you a tank that all of the pest snails were killed in it and the effects that it had on that tank, and then I'll show you a tank that has pest snails in it just so you guys can kind of see the difference that it makes on the ecosystem of the tank. I'm going to begin by showing you guys my worst looking tank. This is a 20-gallon tall and it looks terrible. A lot of the plants died off. I have added some new clippings from a different tank back in here. Hopefully those grow in. And yes, I did like a 50% water change on it last week. I did gravel vac it and there's still that much mulm in the tank. It is insane. There's only a few guppies in here, one cory cat and a betta fish in a 20-gallon, and I think it's because I don't have a filter in here partially, but also I think part of the reason is there's no pest snails in here. I didn't add any. Typically they just come in on the plants, but they must not have came in on the plants, or maybe the guppies ate them or the betta fish ate them. I don't know. I am introducing them back into this tank. I'm trying to get some in there. But as you can see, there's just, the tank just looks blah. Like, it definitely needs more plant growth. Less mulm, obviously, which that's something that pest snails help with. They get into the sand, they turn the gravel over. At least Malaysian trumpet snails turn the sand over. They go along the glass and clean it. They eat all of this waste build up here, all this mulm. They'll help eat that in the tank. And pest snails, or whatever type of snail I want to add into here, would greatly help. I did have a couple of mystery snails, but they were pretty big and getting older, and they have both died. Sadly, I don't think it had anything to do with water parameters. As you can see, the fish are healthy and thriving in this tank, which is kind of shocking to me. This tank looks terrible. I don't do water changes regularly on it. There is no filter, and yet the fish are still doing great. As you can see, they're very active. Now let's go look at another tank that also does not have any little snails in it. This tank right here is my 10-gallon tank. It has one male betta fish, one mystery snail, and a couple of male endlers in it. And as you can see, there's a lot of algae back here in the rotala. There's a lot of algae on the root floaters, and it's killing the plants off, like it's actually choking them out and killing them. And a few months prior, I redid this tank. The tank was thriving. There was a lot of pest snails in there, and I introduced some new plants, and unbeknownst to me, some assassin snails were on those plants, and they killed off all of my little snails, and it was too late. By the time I realized what was happening, they had multiplied all throughout the tank. They'd killed off my snails, and this tank crashed really hard. I had a school of, I think it was 6 neon blue rasboras in here, or maybe I think they're neon blue, shocking blue, something like that. Anyhow, they were blue rasboras, and when all those snails died, I wasn't doing water changes on this tank because the tank had been doing great, right? All those snails were killed off. They were no longer helping maintain the cycle of my tank and keeping the algae at bay. Plus, I assume when they died, there was probably a large spike in the ammonia, and it killed off my whole school of rasboras. I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. They died pretty quickly, and I was pretty upset. And then quickly after that, this algae just took over. Like, this tank looks probably about 50% better than it used to, And you'll notice most of the algae is on the stem plants and the floaters. I'm not sure why that is. But yeah, there's a lot of assassin snails in here now. Let's see if we can see any. I don't know. I'm not seeing any in here. Oh, there's one. That is what an assassin snail looks like. And I was hoping, instead of removing the assassin snails, I was just hoping that they would reproduce at a very quick rate and then keep the algae clean for me, but that doesn't seem to be what they do. So I'm not sure if I should like remove all of them and then reintroduce. I don't know. I feel like it would be a losing battle at this point. But yeah, this tank looks not great. Now I could add a filter to it and trim the plants, try to get some of the algae out, do some water changes, and it would be fine. But if you're kind of lazy like me and you hate doing water changes, definitely add some pest snails to your tank. I have since added a lot of shrimp to this tank, and I think they're really going to help with this tank. Oh, I also forgot to mention I have a couple of nearite snails in here, or maybe I just have one now. I don't remember. No, I got two, I think. But yeah, so I do have other types of snails, but I was pretty bummed when I realized all of my pest snails in this tank were being killed. And as you can see, just like the 20-gallon I showed you before, the tanks just don't look nice. Like, they're my worst looking tanks that I have. And I am pretty sure it is because there's no pest snails in there. Because my tanks with pest snails, they are so much easier to maintain. Their cycle is so much better, even though they're smaller tanks. So definitely get yourself some pest snails. And over here, I guess this is another tank that I should have mentioned. It also has assassin snails. Right here is one little guy. You know, they're kind of cute, honestly, but I hate them. I hate them so much. But this tank actually is starting to pick itself back up. It had a lot of algae in it, just like this tank here next to it. And I did a big water change, cleared out the algae, and added some shrimp to it that quickly reproduced. I have wild type shrimp in here, and they're everywhere, honestly. And I think they're really helping. I also have a nearite snail in here. So I guess if an assassin snail gets introduced to your tank, definitely add a bunch of shrimp. So now that you guys have seen my 3 tanks without pest snails, let me show you guys some of my tanks that do have pest snails in them. Now here's a 5.5-gallon tank, and while there is algae in here, it's a different type of algae, and it is much easier to maintain. It's not an algae that attaches itself to the plants and slowly chokes out the plants. You can't hardly see Skipper because his tank is so dark. I kind of need to pull out some of these floaters. I just pulled them out a few days ago, and I need to pull them out again. But you can see the plants are thriving, and there's not, like, you can see there's pest snails in here, but there's not a ton. Like, it's not overloaded with pest snails. A lot of people don't like them because they breed so much, like they just overpopulate a tank. But your pest snails will not overpopulate your tank if you do not overfeed your tank, and if there's not enough waste in the tank for them to eat off of, or enough algae in the tank for them to eat off of. They will stop breeding and start just kind of dying off so that their numbers are a lot less if your tank does not have a lot of algae or a lot of fish waste or fish food that is just sitting in the tank. And here is my 40-gallon tank that has pest snails in it that is thriving. Now, in all fairness, I do water changes on this tank. I don't really do water changes often on my other tanks. So that is part of why it looks so nice. But you'll notice there's hardly no algae in here, even though I set it up like a month ago. So there should be algae all over in here. And I also just added like 17 shrimp. So, you know, that all makes a pretty big difference on how much algae you have in your tank. And I really try not to overfeed the tank. Now here is a 5.5-gallon tank that is a great example of, it has the pest snails in it, but you don't see them much. Like, here's one. It's a ram's horn snail, but there's not a ton of pest snails in here, and there's also not a lot of algae. And that's why, you know, the pest snails they kept the algae at bay, and then when the algae just stopped producing all the time, the snails stopped producing all the time. There's only one betta fish in here along with a few shrimp, and so there's really no need for the snails to be reproducing at such a quick rate because there's not enough food for them even. You can see on this tank that the plants are like really healthy and thriving, and I am sure that that is because of the snails. They've kept the algae at bay, they've helped eat all the waste down here in the sand, and you can see that they've just really helped this ecosystem out. Over here is another tank with pest snails in it. You can't really see them, and you can see there is more algae in this tank. There's also a lot of shrimp in here. The plants are doing great, but as you can see, it's a different type of algae than what is in my tanks that do not have pest snails in them, if that makes sense. Like, it's not an algae that's choking out the plants and killing them. And you know, I don't really have a whole lot of science to back this up, but I just know that, oh, there's some Malaysian trumpet snails. There they are. I just have noticed that my tanks with pest snails have way less issues and seem to be a lot more balanced, and they have less algae problems. Now, you guys may think that I am crazy for thinking this about pest snails, and you may be right. I don't have any scientific facts or hard evidence to back up my opinion. It is just my opinion. But I do know that those two tanks out in the living room that I showed you guys, they looked much better and much healthier before I accidentally introduced assassin snails to the tank and they were all killed off. The tanks just crashed after that. And my tanks that have had pest snails in them from the beginning have just been very steady. They steadily grew more and more plants and just thrive more and more. And they are not having like this ups and downs in their cycle like the tanks out in the living room were, and still are, honestly. The one has leveled out pretty well, but the 10-gallon is just, the algae looks crazy. But I'm just letting it do its thing and seeing what happens. You know, the betta fish in there acts great, the endlers in there act great, so I'm just gonna see what happens. You know, if they start acting stressed, I'll do a water change, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. It just doesn't look nice, and that is why I love pest snails. They just help a tank look nicer. They add enough to the bioload that it actually feeds the plants, but they eat the algae, so the algae doesn't get worse, from my observation anyhow. But if you are unlike me and you hate pest snails, definitely get yourself some assassin snails, because those things are very effective. Like, literally in a few days, most of your snail population will be wiped out. It is crazy. I hope this video was helpful to you guys, and if you are just now coming across my channel, please consider subscribing. I post fish-related content multiple times a week, and thank you guys for watching.